Hey y'all, I just wanted to make this quick video talking about Resident Evil 2, the remake, and how everyone just, more or less keeps using the word remake in the wrong context. They keep saying, oh, Capcom said they were going to HD remake the game, like, that they would consider that. But no, they are not going to, let me correct you there, because they are not going to HD remaster the game. They're talking about remaking the game, which would mean completely rebuilding it, just like they did for Resident Evil 1 on Nintendo GameCube back in 2002. And Resident Evil Zero, which was originally going to be, a Nintendo 64 exclusive back then, but it was it was just completely rebuilt, like because they switched all their development resources over to the GameCube at the time, since the 64 was getting discontinued. So they send all the resources there. They rebuild the game and everything, more or less, and finish their development completely. And now they're considered Yoshiaki Hirabayashi. Like, of course, I said this in one of my other videos that he's basically asking for the fans' help so that they can remake the game that people want. A lot of people are not sure about them being able to do it properly, considering how Resident Evil 6 went. Like, while I know Resident Evil 6 isn't perfect, I do like the game because they did try to please everyone, and people are going, they didn't try to please no one. Well, guess what? People said they wanted the horror atmosphere in there. They put that. People said they wanted to move and shoot. They put that. People wanted to be able to control the camera in some form. They did that. And I think that's what killed the horror right there, is the fact that they gave people that control over the camera. People complained about, the whole spring thing not being realistic in Resident Evil 5. Well, guess what? So, since people didn't feel that was realistic, they changed it to everyone taking pills now, like the tablets. They take pills to heal themselves when they have herbs now. So, and if that hurts the game as much as the camera control, then guess who's to blame for that? The fans, because you guys are the ones that asked for it. You're the ones who said, but this isn't realistic. Like, well, guess what? You're talking about a game made by Capcom, a company that's not known for being realistic, a company that's known for being imaginative, for making games like Street Fighter and Mega Man, which are both not so realistic games. And matter of fact, they're completely unrealistic if you look at them. So why should Resident Evil be any different? Just because it looks realistic? I mean, it was meant to be, a cinematic experience, a movie feeling to it. So there's no reason for realistic other than, what's going on in the character's situation, in their reality. That's the only thing that should be realistic to them, not try to imitate real life. I mean, I remember, like, when Resident Evil 6 was first announced, of course, like, I'm seeing all these comments. I'm sure some were from kids that, that have never played the game at all. And they're saying things like, why is the president white? If this is supposed to be a reality simulator, they're not doing a very good job. It's like, no, this is based on a game. It's a video game that came out way before Obama was president. And it's just following a story. And for everyone saying the stories don't make sense, like, yes, you have to read into a lot of the files to get some of the story background. But more or less, that's what they want you to do. And they made RE.net so you can more or less see in greater detail, because that's part of the game, the story. That's why they put the files there. So while in-game is classical, they modernized it. They streamlined the controls to make things easier on the player. They try to make everything stress-free, but they made it so stress-free to the point where people feel like, it's too easy, it's not challenging. So, and they held their hand through the entire thing, like, which the developers actually see that, people, rather than looking, they'd rather be told what to do, and So you got what you wanted. They're telling you where to go in the game and all that stuff. But I'm talked all that about Resident Evil 6. Like, you're saying they didn't give you what, but the point being, like, you're saying they didn't give you what you wanted, but they gave you exactly what you wanted, being the majority. You asked for these things, they gave them to you. You wanted puzzles, they give that to you too. They may be easy puzzles, but they still gave them to you. And Resident Evil was never really known for having puzzles that were ridiculously hard. If you go back and play 1, 2, and 3, most of the puzzles in those games were easy. Like in 1 and 2, all the puzzles were pretty much easy. In 3, the only hard puzzle, at least for me, was the water purifying system puzzle at the end when you're in that chemical plant. So that's the only thing that I had a problem with, like, in terms of puzzles when it comes to Resident Evil. But even Resident Evil 4, the puzzles were easy, and Shinji Mikami still had a big development part in that game. Like, he was still, in some ways, like a leader of that project. So if you're saying Capcom didn't give you what you wanted, then you're very mistaken. I mean, it's one thing to be disappointed that the game isn't what you expected, but guess what? That's the fan input, because a lot of the things in the game, they took off of the fan input. I could see it clearly. If you can't, then you're just blinded by pure hatred or by pure ignorance for Resident Evil 6. I mean, they tried to please. You wanted the horror atmosphere, they gave it to you. They tried giving you. Now they tried giving you. Everyone has the goal of stopping the virus, but in terms of story, they gave everyone their own story. So, like, yes, they cross over into each other's stories at certain points, but that means they just meet up for that one part and then they go on their separate ways. But that's it. That's all that means. They have different conversations when you have different characters paired together. So if you're in that part where Chris and Pierce meet up with Jake and Sherry, and you instead of going with your partner and go with one of the opposite characters, you get a different conversation. You hear different things. You hear different details, and it kind of fills in the gaps of the story. If you're wondering why there's plot holes, like, you basically gotta go solve it by pairing up the different characters when you get that chance. They gave that to you. They gave you different routes to take. They gave, limited ammo. They gave people that. Resident Evil 6 has plenty of limited ammo. I mean, sure, it may seem like you're getting a lot of ammo, but really, you can eat up that ammo quick, like, and with the amount of item spaces they gave you, they did it so that your resources stay limited, because Resident Evil 5, I think, had too many spaces that made people feel like, you know what, I don't even need to worry about ammo. So they limited it to how many things you grabbed, and each block held one item, basically. So if you had 2 blocks with the same item, then you were just getting too much of that item. They had Resident Evil 3 gameplay when it came to Jake and Sherry. It was Resident Evil 3 inspired. It was all about running and hiding. So if it felt like a big chase and action oriented, then that's what Resident Evil 3 was. Resident Evil 3 was, while it still had the traditional gameplay, it was very much action oriented. I mean, you had the UBCS, the Umbrella service there, which was basically like a military unit, and they were in there to fight. Like, all the cutscenes displayed action. Even Jill herself displayed action. I mean, she was always jumping around, when you were trying to shoot, especially with Nemesis, doing all these action-oriented moves. And they even had oil drums, so every time you shot them, boom, explosions. But they still had the music, which kind of left the tension there. The music was the part that made the tension, because the game was still very much action oriented, just with the traditional Resident Evil gameplay. Resident Evil 2, it had action in it, but it was more limited compared to Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 1, yeah, Resident Evil 1 had action. And it was just as limited in that game compared to 3. By 3, though, the action was pretty much pumped up already. And then, we got the Resident Evil, the first movie came in, the remake. Those were actually good games. And then there's Resident Evil 0. Now, 0 was a good game. The problem with 0 was, that's when the sales of Resident Evil started to decline, and people started to question whether or not Resident Evil had anything new to offer. And that's what, influenced the whole change in Resident Evil 4. The fact that people were questioning it, and Capcom didn't feel like Resident Evil 4 was turning out to be a Resident Evil game when Shinji Mikami started the project, because, he was going for psychological horror with Leon being infected with the virus and all that. And it would have been like Silent Hill, because Silent Hill's territory is psychological horror. Because Leon, he was fighting ghosts, he was fighting mannequins. Those are things that are in Silent Hill, basically. Ghosts and mannequins. So, while it did look amazing, and it still had somewhat of a traditional Resident Evil gameplay feel to it, it would have been more or less like Silent Hill, and that would have been the end of Resident Evil right there. But no, they extended the life, and Shinji Mikami felt so much pressure that he couldn't take it, so he left. He abandoned Resident Evil, pretty much. He could say no, he didn't, but he did. And then the team that took over for Resident Evil 5, they more or less copied the Resident Evil 4 gameplay, but they forgot the horror, so it was more action-oriented. And that was the only bit of disappointment, but other than that, everything else was pretty much there. Now with 6, they tried going with 4 different stories, and Ada fills in some of the plot holes, but you really gotta make sure you try different things with the different game. People just play the game once and say, oh, this didn't explain that didn't explain this didn't explain that. But you didn't get the chance to, pair up the different characters when they come to it, because if you pair them up and actually listen to their conversations, it fills in those plot holes. So, can Capcom remake Resident Evil 2? I think they can. Because Hiroyuki Kobayashi, he said in the past, he had said a while back that he would like to remake Resident Evil 2 in the style of the Resident Evil remake, which is completely different from the original in its own way. It's a completely different style in some form. And Yoshiaki Hirabayashi, the other producer, last month in an interview with GameSpot, he said, I think if fans really clamor for it, Capcom would consider remaking Resident Evil 2. He didn't say HD remastering, he said remaking the game, meaning completely rebuild. That's, like I said, that's different. Anyone says, oh, Capcom said they would make it in HD. Well, guess what? HD is a given in today's world, so, anything regardless will be in HD, including the latest game releases. The only difference is, it'll be completely rebuilt. Because it's been already said with multiple developers that PS1 games cannot be HD remastered, for the simple fact that even if they do, they'll still be very pixelated. You won't be able to see it as good as maybe a PS2 game, because that's not that far behind, and they can just, upscale that resolution so that it actually matches today's games in quality. But that's it. So, Like I'm just saying, don't misuse the word remake in the wrong context. When they say remake, they mean remake. They don't mean an HD remaster, an upscale resolution, because people use that word in the wrong context and they get the wrong idea. Much like with Final Fantasy X, Square Enix is not releasing news on it now, but when they were, they said it's just going to be a simple HD remaster. Everyone was like, oh, they said they're HD remaking, they're remaking it. Like, no, it's not a remake, it's just a remaster. But even it's taking long, we haven't seen anything of it, but point being, like, look at certain collections, look at Eco and Shadow of the Colossus, that's an HD remastering. Look at Tomb Raider Trilogy, that's an HD remastering of, Legend and Anniversary, because Underworld was already in HD. Look at the God of War, look at Metal Gear Solid, those are HD remasterings. Silent Hill, even though that wasn't done too well, that's an HD remaster. Anyway, I'll leave you all to think about this and, just comment, rate, do whatever. And I'll hopefully make another video soon. Have a nice day, y'all. Bye.